was doing, internships and went and interned as a youth pastor at my church in Sandpoint, doing all those kinds of things. And so that's kind of how this kind of ministry thing had been going right before I moved to Fresno. Additionally, there's a couple other things that I kind of figured out in that time that helped me out socially. So one of those things is just athletics. I was an athlete. I wouldn't say that I was the best athlete at everything, but I did a lot of team sports, and then also was involved in but being a part of, I was a freestyle skier and a wakeboarder, and I had these different things that helped me, again, kind of connect with people. I had music that I continued to develop, and playing the guitar and writing songs and those kinds of things, ways that I sought to influence people. I kind of became sarcastic too, and I'd use sarcasm and humor again as a way of interacting with people. And again, growing up, I kind of been taught this whole thing of let your light shine. In Timothy, it talks about everything you do it for the glory of God, and that was kind of my mantra. It's kind of this thing in the back of my head of like, do these things, use, whether it's your athletics or your ability to connect with people or whatever it is, do that for the glory of God, to spread the gospel. I had these dreams of becoming a professional athlete, which I didn't do and ended up down another path. But even though I knew that, I still knew that those things could be employed to influence people in ministry. One of the other things that I noticed through this time is that many people I knew and interacted with weren't really interested in spirituality. Many of the quote-unquote cool people didn't find religion interesting. And so through a combination of just the way that I was raised, my life circumstances, and just seeing my friends who had no interest in spirituality, it taught me that my role was to be awesome for Jesus. Wait on that. Taught me that my role was to be awesome for Jesus. And so, it's something that when I showed up in Fresno, my pastor confirmed. He says, you've got to be the guy. You have to be the one that brings us all together. Essentially saying this all depends on your ability to be awesome for Jesus. And I was reasonably good at it. If you were a jock, I kind of had either the team sports route that I could go down to connect, or I had the action sports, not extreme sports. If you were a musician, I played in the church band, but I also played in kind of this quasi-punk metal alternative band as well. So depending on where you were at, we could connect. As the funny guy, made church entertaining. If you were a skeptic, we could talk about things. I wasn't afraid of your questions. And if you were obnoxious, we could light each other up with wit and sarcasm and do all those things. And we did mission trips and ski trips and all these kinds of things. And our youth group grew, quickly, rapidly. We began to have kids from all over the place that were coming, both kids from the community and kids from other churches, which made other pastors nervous. And in fact, several other churches hired local youth pastors because they wanted to kind of try to compete, which I kind of thought was a badge of honor. And actually, there were some that said that actually forbade their youth leaders and their youth to interact with us, and because they were worried about them wanting to come be a part of what we were doing. And after 4 years of successful ministry, I was done. And it just wasn't me that was done. It was my wife was done. 4 years of being awesome for Jesus had nearly killed us. And 4 years of being awesome for Jesus had created some good things. There was some good ministry that was done there, but had also created a vacuum that existed when we left. Churches in North America are facing a crisis. Youth and young adults are leaving religion at an alarming rate. And let me take a note here. That thing that used to happen when you were younger, and for some of you still happens, when your parents are talking about you and you're like, I'm standing right here. I hear everything you say. and there's kind of that awkward thing going on. We're going to do a little bit of that. So if you fall under the category of youth and young adult, yeah, we're going to talk about what's going on with you. But what we're going to see is that it's actually all of us. It's actually not just youth and young adults. We all have some of the same things going on. But if we look at statistics, kind of the mandatory statistics, 2/3 of young adults are leaving church within two years of graduating from high school. And quite frankly, many churches, not just our system, but definitely within our system, if you show up there, you won't see anyone under the age of 40. And maybe you're lucky maybe not even the age of 60. Some church leaders actually speculate right now that the number of young adults leaving may reach closer to 70 to 90%, as quite frankly, we engage some very difficult cultural things for us to process as a church. That's just the nature of what it is. Now, when they talked about those who were leaving church, 29% said it was actually something they planned to do. So it's the kind of thing where maybe my parents are making me go to this Christian high school or something like that, but when I'm done, I'm out of here. So there was about 29% that said that is. So that means that more than 7 out of 10 say that their decision to leave the church was unintentional. It just kind of happened. And, as we look at the different reasons that people stopped attending, some moved to college and just stopped going. Some, it was church members, seemed judgmental or hypocritical. Some didn't feel connected to people in the church, disagreed with the church's stance. Work responsibilities just kind of got in the way. But the interesting thing, and this was a quote from one of the researchers, it says, "What the research tells us may be even more concerning for Protestant churches. There was nothing about the church experience or faith foundation of those teenagers that caused them to seek out connection at a local church once they entered a new phase of life. The time they spent with activity in church was simply replaced with something else." So in other words, church was something that was fine, and it was something that was a part of life. But when circumstances changed and I moved on to something else, there wasn't enough draw there to make me actually feel like I should continue. There wasn't enough there to make me actually feel like, hey, I'm going to actually seek out another group, another community of faith to interact with. So while maybe it wasn't bad, it just wasn't that good. Got to find my spot here. Hold on. There we go. And this isn't new information. So when I was going to school back in the early 2000s, we were showing the same slides. Right? They weren't exactly the same. But early 2000s, the Southern Baptist Convention reported that approximately 70 to 88% of theirs were leaving within 1 year of graduating college. And in general, the general number back then was around 70% in the 2000s. And research has shown that, maybe a third, maybe a little less of those come back, somewhere in there. But it's not a new problem. It's something that has happened, for years, and it's something that we've talked about, again, 20 years ago. And part of the issue is how we dealt with it 20 years ago. When I was going through, that was the time where a lot of people were recognizing this problem and saying, hey, we need to do something. And so it was like, let's create, youth ministry programs and that. And so people like me went out, and essentially what happened is, a church says, hey, we want to reach our young people. So what do? We find a youth pastor, preferably like as close to the same age as the young people as possible, because they make good decisions. Well, let's talk about me, because I made good decisions at that age, because I know some of you actually make much better decisions than I do even now. That was a really lame thing to say. I have to just take a moment and apologize. That's fair. So, we hire this person that's charismatic and that's fun and everything. We stick them in a room way off up somewhere where they won't bother anybody, and we let them go nuts. We let them go crazy, and good ministry happens. Good things happen. But when they graduate, or when that youth pastor moves on, what is there? What kind of connection is there to the community? What is there to make somebody going through that time of life, that process, say, you know what? I've graduated out of this program that was specifically designed for me, and now I just really want to stay connected to this community. There's nothing to be an anchor there. And quite honestly, too, that model of ministry burns people out. You know, being awesome for Jesus or cool for Christ, killing it for the kingdom, I got a bunch of these, shredding for shalom, rock stars of religion, sending it for salvation, Yolo for Yahweh. I'll stop. But it can only be sustained so long. And then what? You end up with burned out people, and you end up with a group of people who were counting on that person who have been abandoned. Effective ministry doesn't come about from being the dopest disciple. By the way, that's a term that's popular right now. It was popular in 2000. Yep, it's back. Anyways. And changes in the process of adolescence are complicating this too. When researchers look at adolescence, at the process of adolescence, if we look historically back in the early 1900s, so great-grandma and grandpa, and how they define this is the start of adolescence. They said, hey, when biological changes are happening, that's when we're going to start. And the end of adolescence, they essentially say, or when people can answer three questions. Who am I? Where do I belong? And do I matter? And so research based around this process of adolescence kind of uses that paradigm to decide what happens. And so if we look at back in the early 1900s, for great-grandma and grandpa, at age 14 is kind of when that process started. And at age 16, it was done. Right? At age 14, those changes started to happen. And by age 16, a lot of people were married. A lot of people had their vocation. A lot of people, they're home. They took over the farm. Whatever they were doing, they had this stuff and they went on with life. They knew who they were, where they belonged, and why they mattered. And we'll get back to that in just a minute. But they had answers to those questions. Now, we fast forward to 1970s. So that process, instead of starting at age 14, moved back to about age 12. And instead of ending at age 16, it moved forward to about age 18. So we have this process of from 12 to 18, which is what most of us recognize as, we call it the teenage years or whatever. But once you hit 18, moving into 19, we're like, okay, it's adulthood, right? That's why many of our laws are based on those ages. And so that was back in the 70s. If we move forward to now, that process starts at about age 10, maybe even sooner. And it ends, we don't really even know. We don't even know if it does end. People speculate, is it like the mid-30s? Is it like, where is it? Where people have these three questions. Who am I? Where do I belong? And do I matter? And what we've done is we've taken this process that used to take a couple of years and we've spread it out over decades. And so we end up with, that's a stressful process. There's a lot of things that we have to figure out and work through that process. And quite frankly, some of us never resolve those three questions. Who am I? Where do I belong? And do I matter? Now, the other thing that compounds it is some of the institutions that have helped us to navigate that have also just become less effective. We look at families, and a lot has changed about family life now. I'm in the middle of family life. I have a 9-year-old and a 12-year-old, and we have a great time together, but there's a lot of challenges to being a parent. Challenges with time. There's just so much busyness that we have of actually spending quality time together as a family. There's so many influences that maybe have a different voice than I do as far as to where I'm hoping as a family we go. We know there's a lot of broken families. And so families struggle to help adolescents through this process. School's one that people have used to kind of help with that, but we know that schools can't do all of that, for one. Oftentimes, too, what's reinforced is that, the kids who are reinforced with why you matter in school, well, it's probably because you got good grades and because, you were the smart kid, or you were into athletics, or you were one of these things. That's why you matter. We've got sports teams and clubs and all those kinds of things, which, again, they can pass on really good things to people going through this process. But at the same time, oftentimes what we walk away with is win at all costs, and you're only valuable if you come out on top. And then we come to the church. And the church is the place where we're supposed to be able to find answers to these questions. Who am I? Where do I belong? And do I matter? But we know, if we look at those statistics that were just there, that we haven't necessarily done a very good job of it. And quite honestly, most of us can think of experiences in our own lives, regardless of our age, where that just didn't happen. And unfortunately, oftentimes the message that comes from the church when adolescents are asking those questions of, that when you ask, who am I, the answer oftentimes is not who you should be. Or where do I belong? Not sure, not here. And do I matter? Well, you matter when we talk about church numbers and the future of my church. And we wonder why the next generation isn't that interested in hanging around, why it's not connected to the community. And even a church like Summit, I love Summit. This is a place that's home for me, and that has been so great for me in helping me to learn and develop my understanding of God, and a place that has provided me an opportunity to be involved with ministry in a lot of really fun ways. But even here, while we may serve breakfast and we may have a little bit less dated, worship service and that kind of thing, and maybe we show some edgy videos sometimes and that type of thing, it doesn't mean we're welcoming to young adults or, quite frankly, the rest of the community. I got a little pop quiz for you. When was the last time you spoke to a youth or young adult at church that you didn't know already? And for those of you who are youth and young adults, this actually applies to you too. When was the last time you spoke with somebody in your age group that you didn't know already? How many names of youth and young adults in your community do you know? Of the ones that you do know, what do you know of their story? What do you know about their life experience? What have you learned in your conversations with them? And again, before I go on, those three questions we talked about, who am I, where do I belong, and do I matter? We're going to hammer those a bunch just because I want them to stick in there. Those are questions that aren't just for adolescents anymore. And quite frankly, they never were just for adolescents. Those are the questions that all of us deal with on a regular basis. And if we look at our decisions, if we look at the things that we do, these three questions essentially come down to a question of value. And if we look at the decisions that we make and the way that we interact with people, virtually all of them we can trace back to one of these questions, to the origin there. Think about the last conflict you were in. Usually that comes from somebody insulting your sense of value. It comes from somebody questioning your identity, somebody questioning whether or not you belong. It comes from somebody questioning whether or not you matter. Think about conversations, when we hang out here and we tell stories in the back, because that's fun. We enjoy hanging out and telling stories, but what do? Well, someone tells a story, and then we say, ooh, I've got a story I can't wait to tell. And it finally comes to our turn, and we tell our story, and it's our way of saying, I know that's cool, but what about this? It's a search for value. If we look deep enough, just about every decision we make is based on a search for value. These questions, too, drive ministry. Many people are afraid to interact with people they don't know. That's kind of true for all of us. And when we and the thing that I hear when I talk to people about it, and I'll be honest, I'm the same. Like there's people I'm like, oh, I should talk to them, but I don't really know what to say, that kind of thing. But when people talk about why they don't go out and they don't interact with somebody new walking in, they say, well, I just don't know what to say. I just don't know what to tell this person. And ultimately what it comes down to is it's us saying, I don't know what to say that will make them think I'm cool enough to listen to. Right? Like, I don't know what to say to make them think that I'm valuable enough that we should have this conversation. It comes back to those questions of value and where our value comes from. And when we talk specifically, youth ministry is one of the hardest places to get volunteers. The younger divisions are too, but once people start getting into middle school, high school, and if you're that age, yes, they're scared of you. They are. Because what happens is when those of us who have moved on come back and immediately we re-encounter the same type of things that we encountered in high school, the same things that we were scared of, that we were nervous about. We gravitate to hanging out with the same group of kids that we hung out when we were in high school or whatever that age is. And we find our happy place and we try to just be there. Or we're just afraid to even step out and do that at all. It shapes how we interact with people and how we deal with, what sometimes feels like rejection. And see, the problem is that many of us are struggling to find suitable answers for those questions. I tossed up a list here. Let's see, I think I tossed up a list. There we go. Alternative sources of value, and we'll get to why it's alternative in a minute, but places where people get their value from. Occupation, athletics, physical appearance, humor, organization, the ability to organize, the ability to control things and manipulate things, popularity, efficiency, being really good at getting things done, problem solving, parenting, intellect, wisdom, production. All of us can maybe resonate with some things a little bit differently. But it's easy to look at those and say, yeah, I am somebody who's wise. I share my wisdom with people. And that's important to me because I have the ability to speak wisdom into their life. But the thing is that all of these are based on production, and at some point, all of those will let us down. Your occupation, well, someday you got to retire. Either that or you get fired, which is even a bigger assault to your identity. Athletics, yeah, someday you're not very athletic anymore. I know about that. Physical appearance, yeah, someday you're not going to look very good. Some of us start that way, but humor, someday you become a parent, and I guarantee you are not funny anymore. That's the way it works. You're not funny. Organization, control, popularity, your intellect, your wisdom, all of those things at some point will let you down and will fail you. And if your value is based off of these things, it will be, it's difficult to deal with. I mean, that's why there's midlife crises. That's why we run into times in life where we struggle, because those things where we basically got our value from suddenly are gone and they don't hold us up anymore. And what happens is we become so busy, even if we're not being assaulted in that way, if those values aren't being assaulted in that way, we become so busy trying to prove to other people that we're valuable that we can't show people that they are. We're so intent on proving our own value that we can't even process showing other people that they're valuable. And here's where I'll get a little bit of scripture involved, because the thing about Christianity is it's the one place, it's the only place where we can basically develop a value system that is not based on your production. Other religions, based on production, if you really get down to the heart of it. Other life philosophies based on what you produce and what you do. Christianity is the only place where your value comes not from what you produce, but from what God thinks about you. In his book, What's So Amazing About Grace, Philip Yancey says, there's nothing we can do to make God love us more, and there's nothing that we can do to make God love us less. And he goes on to kind of expound on this idea and talks about, all the things that we do spiritually that make us feel spiritual, reading your Bible and praying and, hey, I went and helped somebody today and all these things that we do that kind of give us bonus points, if you will, within our Christian experience. None of those things change the way God feels about you. And the flip side is also true because all of us have darkness. All of us have pain that we're dealing with. And none of that changes the way that God feels about you either. If we look at Ephesians, it's pretty clear. It says, "For it is by grace you have been saved through faith. And this is not from yourself. It is the gift of God, not by works, so that no one could boast." It's not production. Has nothing to do with what you did. Has nothing to do with what you are going to do. It's purely the gift of God. If we move on to Romans, this even spells it out a little bit more. It says, "You see, at just the right time, when we were still powerless, Christ died for the ungodly. Very rarely will anyone die for a righteous person, though for a good person, someone might possibly dare to die. But God demonstrates his own love for us in this. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us." The Bible actually says, while we were enemies of God, he died for us. See, your value doesn't come from what you produce. I want you to think about that for a minute. All of us can say that. We've been taught that. We know about grace. We know those things. It doesn't mean we may know it here, but it doesn't mean that we feel it here. Your value is not based on what you produce. It is not based on your occupation. It is not based on your popularity. It is not based on your looks. It is not based on your ability to organize. You're valuable because God values you. And that's it. Isn't that good news? Amen. Like not having to earn your value and your own worth. Like that's the gospel. That's all it is. And that's good news. And it changes everything. See, now you don't have to be worried about proving to anyone else how valuable you are. You don't have to spend your time trying to decide what you're going to say in that conversation that's going to make people think you're cool enough to listen to. You don't have to figure out, how you're going to contribute to your organizational abilities or whatever it is to make the rest of the community think you're valuable. You are valuable because God says you're valuable. And once you understand that, and once you believe that here, now you can actually focus on showing someone else that they're valuable. See, it's our job to be interested, not interesting. It's our job to be not focused on where our value comes, but instead understanding that because God loves us and sees us that way, that he does the same for other people, and they need to know that too. And that's exactly what Jesus did in his ministry. If you look, he went around and the people that flocked to Jesus, they were the ones that society said had no value. They were the poor. They were the ones who, the sick. They were the widows, which in that culture was, again, was a problem. And they were the children. People flocked to Jesus because he showed them that they were valuable. And if you really look at his ministry and the heart of what he was doing on a day-to-day basis, you'll see that. And ultimately, we see the ultimate revelation of that through his sacrifice. God essentially saying, you're valuable. And you're valuable because I say you are. So back to kind of this whole youth, young adult thing. And quite frankly, for all of us, because what I'm sharing, if we as a community want to be a place where people feel safe and where people connect and where they actually want to be, it doesn't matter what age you are. People are looking for someone to tell them that they're valuable. One of those lines that as a youth pastor I used to hear a lot was, especially when we do something up front and they'd be up here or something like that. And I just love it when you young people get up there and do that stuff. Incidentally, I still get that sometimes when I lead music, and I'm 41, so probably that ship has sailed. But which is true. I get excited when I see younger people taking the lead and doing those things. But this is my question for you. Did you ever actually talk to one? Do you seek them out? Do you let them know that you're proud of them, that you're excited that they're a part of the community? Don't just tell Terry. People need to know that they're valued, regardless of their age. So real quick, we're going to wrap this thing up, but I want to just give you some really practical advice on how to do this on a day-to-day level, because it's great if we talk about it. That doesn't necessarily change anything. It's only good if we actually go out and start showing people that they're valuable. That's when it actually makes a difference. So if we look, there's just kind of 4 things here that I think are really important for showing that. And so number 1, you've got to understand where your own value comes from. If you're constantly trying to prove to the world why you're valuable, there's no way that you can spend time focusing on showing other people that they're valuable. Because it's fight or flight. It's us against the world, and we've got to show them. So we have to understand where our value comes from, and that value comes from God and from the way that God feels about us. And ultimately, that other people have that same value. So once we understand that, then we've got to seek people out. Like, we can't just sit there and wait for somebody to walk up to us so that we can show them they're valuable. It's not the way it works, Occasionally, people will reach out and let you know that they're hurting. They will reach out and let you know they need something. But the vast majority of us will just stay in our silence. Some of us don't even know that we're searching for value. But, if we're going to, if we talk about cross-generational things, bridging that gap, we've got to reach across and actually seek people out. And again, this is true regardless of age. Yes, I do young adult and youth ministry. So that's what I tend to focus on. But it's true regardless of age. These things don't go away when you're 60, 70, 80. So once we seek people out, what do? I don't know what to say. How do I talk to someone? Again, that's us saying, how do I make them think I'm cool enough that they should talk to me? Where in reality, you just got to learn people's story. There's this deep-seated need in all of us to be known and to be valued for who that really is. And our society provides a lot of ways for us to put out false images of ourselves and false constructs for other people to see. Again, us searching for value and trying to say, look at me, I'm valuable. But at the end of the day, all of us really, one of the greatest things that we can experience is to be known for who we truly are and valued in that. And so when we seek people out, we learn their story. And the great thing is that takes all the pressure off of you. Because you don't have to come up with magic things to say and that. You don't have to think of some great story, or you don't have to be funny. You don't have to be any of those things. You've got to learn people's story. Where do they come from? What things drive them in life? What is their experiences? What brought you here? One of the most powerful phrases that you can just say is, hey, tell me more about that. I'd love to hear more about your life journey and what's brought you here. There's different ways to say it, but that's what it is. It's us learning people's story. Incidentally, this doesn't just work in church. Like, if you want the ultimate dating tool, right? Instead of going on a date and trying to impress someone with how amazing you are, ask them their story. You'll be like the best date ever. I can't say you'll be the most good-looking date ever or any of that stuff, but people will walk away saying, that connection was amazing. I'm so glad I met that person, regardless of where that goes. Also works in marriages, by the way. It works in any social situation. Showing people they're valuable always works. And so once we've learned people's story, the final thing is actually just engage in that story. It's one thing to be like, yeah, that was nice, and never talk to them again. Right? That's not being a community. That's not being connected. I mean, it's better than maybe never talking to someone, but engaging with people. Now, the hard thing about this is we can't engage with everyone we encounter. There's statistics that say, when in the youth pastoring world, it says, you can, there's different levels of significance that you can impact. And at that highest level, it's a couple of people. Some people say, yeah, maybe up to like 12 people, you can have like this really deep impact. And for others, it's going to be more peripheral because quite frankly, it's just not possible to connect with that many people. And that's okay. But for people that we do connect, we have to continue to engage in their story. We have to continue to seek them out, continue to build those connections, and continue to remind them that they're valuable. And the great thing about this is if one person is doing it, it just doesn't work that well. But if 100 people are doing it, that's a whole different story. And you can have a place that people walk into, and when they leave, they say, man, I don't know, there's something different about that place because people treated me differently. People heard me and they validated me and they showed me that I was worth something. What if we could be that community that just engaged in people's stories? Not to be nosy. I mean, that's what some of us default to. We're the organizers. Let's learn your story so I can fix it. That's not what we're talking about here. We learn their stories so that we can come along and we can do those parts of life together that we do, and we can support them in that and build them up in that. And that works across all ages. So kind of as I wrap things up here, I just want to tell you about something that we're starting here at Summit. And there's nothing magic about it. It's a covert operation that I just told you about. My wife thinks it's funny. See, I'm still funny. Actually, as long as I think I'm funny, that's all that matters. So we're calling it Mission Z, which is cheesy. It's like Gen Z, Mission Z, that whole thing. Yeah, it's a cheesy name. We chose it because we just couldn't think of anything else because we're not funny anymore. So this is what this is. You can go to the next slide if you want. But essentially what we're going to be doing is for those of you who decide you want to be a part of this, it's about being intentional about connecting with people. It's about, and yes, we're doing it in that context of youth and young adult, but this goes beyond that. This goes to like connecting with people of other age groups and demographics as well. If you are a youth or young adult, yeah, this is for you. It's about you looking for people to connect with, maybe your age, maybe people who are older. But it's about us basically coming to the point where we say we're not going to go around just trying to build ourselves up, but we're going to actually try to show people that they're valuable. And so what this is, and there's some really fancy business cards out there that Natalia made up for me, which was awesome. And it's something to just remind you. And if you text Mission Z to our text to church line, which is 208-2704-5905, or there's also the website on there. Again, you grab one of those cards that has it on there. But what all this is going to do is it's going to create something that just reminds us to connect, reminds us to reach out and connect with people. And, once a month or something, we'll send out some things where we talk about, like, some of the strategies for doing that or some of the things, some of the barriers that we find in our own lives and just, like, practical advice about how to deal with those kinds of things. But, again, it's about us being intentional about connecting with people. And so if that's something you're interested in, which I hope you are, on your way out, just on the table out there's some of those cards. Grab one, sign up for it, and we'll kind of just every now and then be sending stuff out. And honestly, I mean, this is for me. I have to remind myself on a daily basis, and this is my job. This is what I do. But unless we're intentional about doing these things, they just don't happen. And so I invite you to join me in that process of being intentional about connecting with people. And when I say connecting, I mean showing them that they're valuable and that they belong here. Who are they? They're people. They're children of God. Where do they belong? Right here. And why do they matter? Because God says that they matter, and we believe that too. Let's pray. Lord, thank you for the way you feel about us and how much you love us. And we need to experience that fully. Sometimes we know it in our head, but not in our hearts. And so I ask that you lead us in life to the places and through the experiences that will help us to understand that we don't have to earn your love. It's something that you give to us. Help us to know that not just in our head, but in our heart. And as we understand that, show us how to show other people that they're valuable too, and how to reach out and to connect with people and help them to understand that ultimate truth that you love them, not for what they are, what they produce, any of those things, but you love them because they are your children. Thank you. Amen. Well, have a great rest of your day. Again, beard and sweater season, so that's officially on. Snowing up in the mountains, all that good stuff. Rebecca's getting tokens here, so if you're kids, come on up, grab a token, and we'll see the rest of you later. Oh.
You told me to love somebody like I love myself. You call me to do these things with you, I won't fail. I can do the impossible, reach the unreachable. You provide